So I'm going to cover three very specific things this morning in the next 55 minutes or so. The first of those, we're going to talk a little bit about the BRM or Business Relationship Manager as a role, and then speak a bit about the discipline and some of the various elements that are associated with that discipline. And then the last thing that we'll talk about is a set of tools, concepts, frameworks, and where you can learn about those as you're interested. So also, if you have any questions, if you would just put those into the chat window, I'll be monitoring that as I go through the webinar today. So please feel free to ask questions. I'll try to respond to them as quickly as possible. So a week or two ago, I started to read a book, the latest book by Daniel Pink. I love Daniel Pink. He's got some great stuff out there. And this particular book was about to sell as human. And in the book, he starts to explore this concept called asymmetry or symmetry of information, where one individual in a relationship, in this case a selling relationship, has basically a leg up on the other party because they have more knowledge, more information about whatever is within the scope, within the concept of this relationship. And I related this back to my days when I was on the practitioner side of the house, and I remember that at that time IT was called data processing, and I had an individual that had responsibility for the systems that we were using as an organization. And I made a suggestion to him about things that I thought might possibly could be done to improve the system, and he basically dismissed me, but essentially just suggesting that I really didn't know what I was talking about. And to some degree that stung a bit, and because I felt like I had some knowledge. But the world has changed, and it's changed fairly significantly, where now there's not just asymmetry, where IT itself is the be-all, end-all with respect to information about systems and services. Instead, we have very strong understanding by individuals within the business as respects technology. And so where that takes us is that we now need to understand how we can carve a very strong relationship between a service provider, an IT organization, and our business partners, where we know that we have this symmetry information plus other forces, other drivers that are coming into play. And so the question is, how do we deal with that? And so the idea is, for me, in 2007, IDLE released its latest version or the update version 3 of the IDLE framework. And at that time, we talked a bit about this new role, or at least it was being explored as a role or as a process called business relationship management. And as I presented this to others that I was working with, or even individuals within the Pink Elephant organization, my thought was that this was a sales job. I mean, this was a role that you were basically the outward face of IT and relating to the customer base. And to a great extent, I found that basically I was both right and I was wrong. And so this past week, I was teaching a course on business relationship management, the foundation course that we'll talk about here in a little bit. And I asked the class, I said, think about the last time, or maybe the best time, that you've ever had an experience with a salesperson. How would you describe one attribute that would typify that interaction? And then what would be an attribute of when you really had a bad interaction? And so they came up with a really fascinating list. And so this was a list of items, and I've kind of thinned it out a little bit because there was just so much for us to consume, especially today. But you notice that there's an interesting set of attributes or categories that are attached to the qualities of being a good salesman versus a bad. And as a matter of fact, as I looked at these, it came to me that, in essence, this was truly at the heart of what we're talking about with respect to a business relationship manager. In other words, if I think about those good qualities, good qualities tell me, first of all, what I need to have in terms of having this relationship and having a strong interaction between the person who has something to provide to me and I can consume it or not, is that there has to be this building of a relationship, understanding what it takes in order to interact successfully, to understand both the hard side in terms of the objectives and also understanding the soft side of the benefits. And the only way I can do that is if I form a relationship. And of course, that relationship itself has to be based on something that's important to me. I'm not too interested in developing relationships about commodity items and so forth, which then leads me to the next idea, was that in order for me to have that strong relationship, I had to understand the customer. In other words, that salesperson, if they were working with me to either buy a house or a car, something that was very, very important to me and my family, what they did is they worked to create a level of understanding about what our needs were, what the specific drivers were as respects the purchase and the like. And so understanding the customer was extremely important. And then as I thought even further about where does this all fit within the IT and the business partner realm, it also requires that I have to have some level of management discipline. There's got to be some level of planning, some objective nature as respects attaching some priorities and importance to the things that are in consideration. And so all of those elements came together for me as I was thinking about this BRM process and role and so forth, that it really does come to the heart of what the nature is of business relationship management as both a process, a role, and as a discipline. So if we kind of take that as a basis for understanding, let's look at how we can define what the BRM role and also if the practice within an organization, how would we define this? So the Business Relationship Management Institute, within their body of knowledge, positions this particular definition. And the definition itself, I think, captures the heart of what we were talking about at the start of that class. In other words, the BRM has to have a deep understanding of who they are representing. And we'll see here in a minute that basically represent two parties in the IT and business relationship. And what the BRM focuses very strongly on is to understand from a business partner perspective, what are the drivers, what are the issues, and so forth that will create very specific demand from the business for the products and services that the service provider, or in this case, IT, would make available to the business partner. And then once we understand what that demand is, then we can capture the value that will be created in the creation, the delivery, and the management of those services and products. And so as a definition, what we are going to focus on through the rest of the morning, and actually this is what we talk about a great deal within the class, is what is the nature of understanding and creating that demand, and then being able to pass the requirements of that demand back to the service provider, which leads us to this understanding that in order to be a BRM, there's really two elements attached to this. The first of those is that BRM itself is an art. In other words, the role is one that relies heavily on the unique capabilities of the individual who's playing that BRM role to communicate, to negotiate, to build the relationships, all of these which I would consider to be soft skills for any individual. But those soft skills themselves are also built on the science of BRM, or specific frameworks, models, concepts, and the like. And so for the BRM to be successful, they have to understand these concepts, these frameworks, and so forth, but then to find a way in which they can associate those in such a way that they can maintain a very strong relationship with the customer, so that the idea of value being delivered, manifested, and well accepted by the business partner, that can be fully realized. So how do they do that, and why is this so terribly important? Well, the idea of the BRM is that the BRM himself or herself has to sit with a foot in two camps. So they have a foot in the business world, and they have a foot in the service provider or the IT world. So the idea is that the BRM is sitting at the intersection or the convergence of these two entities within any organization. And by doing so, and by recognizing the fact that they do have a foot in two camps, they in essence play out three very, very specific roles. The first of those roles is what we would call a connector role. In other words, the BRM will identify what are the key issues, the demands, the challenges, the strategies, the plans, and so forth that the business partner has that they are attempting to employ in order to accomplish their mission and their vision. They connect that back to what are the providers' capabilities, resources, services, and so forth. And so there's this concept that the BRM, by understanding fully what the needs are of the business, they can reach back into the service provider organization and provide direction for both the business as well as the service provider IT in terms of what's required, what's possible, what needs to be developed, what needs to be extended, and maybe even possibly what needs to be retired. Again, all of this comes together in order to support value being delivered back to the customer or the business partner. So that's one role. The second role is a rather interesting one. It's called the orchestrator role. But what the orchestrator, it's really more, if you kind of think of an analogy, it's like the conductor in an orchestra. So the conductor has all the individuals that are in the orchestra. They all play different instruments and the like. And there's a focus on bringing all of those individuals together at the right time in order to accomplish the playing of a symphony and so forth. And the conductor has the score in front of him or her. And as they move through the various elements of the score, the conductor is bringing in the violins or the timpanis or the brass instruments and the like, such that the score itself is played out effectively. And we do the same thing as BRMs. We understand what the needs are of the business based on the demands, and as such, what we do is we bring in the right roles at the right time to have the right discussions with the business relative to this demand that's being surfaced through the various conversations that are occurring and are being facilitated by the BRM. So orchestrator is the second role. The third role is one that we call navigator. And the navigator role, as it would be in a ship, where the navigator is plotting the course for the ship to take to guide itself safely through the various waters, the hazards that might be evident either below the surface or through weather and the like. We do the same thing as a BRM. We assist both the business provider and IT in terms of developing roadmaps and plans and strategies, but also we bring to bear the right resources that are necessary in order for us to be able to develop those plans and roadmaps and so forth. So folks like system engineers, architects, the CTO, and so forth, those individuals are associated with these planning activities. The BRM recognizes who they are and when their skills and talents are specifically needed. So the BRM the BRM plays all three of these very significant roles in the organization. Again, taking this back to the idea that by sitting with a foot in both camps, they have the ability to have transparency into not only what the needs are of the business, but also the service provider's capability for delivering that. So what are there things, though, today that are going on that are various forces that are driving the need to have that individual that sits with the forces in both camps? And quite honestly, yeah, there really are. I mean, we have anymore, we know that we can source various IT services and so forth by using various resources that sit both inside the four walls of the organization as well as available either cross country or around the world. So any type of XaaS development or resourcing, we have a very strong emphasis anymore in that the CIO and the individuals that are responsible for delivering services, they have to have an eye to what they can themselves individually provide, as well as what other resources they could bring into play. And primarily that's because there's this need for business agility. The business anymore has to spin on the dime. Competition is rampant everywhere. The competitive forces and regulatory challenges and things of that nature are requiring that the business be able to respond quickly and to move in different directions. And as such, the IT organization has to be prepared to deal with those rapidly changing conditions. And then also we have the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, there's a symmetry of information where the business is really well-versed in what technology can and cannot do. Individuals today are coming up with the fingers on the keyboards, and they have this tech savviness associated with them. And so they have a great insight in terms of what's possible and what's not possible across the technology space. And so what that's forcing IT to become is to move from being just an order taker to one in which we play a strategic partner role with the business. There's this convergence that's happening where the business itself is so reliant on IT that, in essence, the two organizations themselves are beginning to merge together and almost beginning to appear as if they are one, which really leads us to start to think in a more strategic setting as to what the relationship is between the business and IT, and the need to have someone who can sit in the intersection in that Venn diagram to help us understand not only what business needs are, but also what are the capabilities of a providing organization such as IT. So if this is a strategic level role, a strategic level function, what is it that, if I was going to look for individuals who might play that role, what might I look for? Well, this is just, to me, this is sort of a minor, a short list of a skill set, and it's made up of those skills that I've witnessed myself in working with other organizations as they stood up the BRM role within their organizations, but also pulling out some of the information that we talk about in the BRM Foundation course. So first and foremost, the individual really has to be both a leader and a manager. They have to have the ability to inspire others, to be willing to step out and take a position and encourage others to potentially follow that. But they also have to have discipline with respect to the way in which they organize their work, they organize the means by which resources themselves are being orchestrated or brought to bear to solve very specific issues. And most importantly, they choose to be accountable for the work that they do. It's important to them that they're not just responsible, but they are going to take the lead to assure that things get done. They've got to be good, strong communicators, and that set of communication skills has to span the various disciplines, good writer, good verbal skills, but also nonverbal skills are extremely important in terms of expressing the emotion and the tone that could be associated with conversations that could be critical to a relationship. They typically, BRMs themselves really don't have any authority with respect to the work that they do. Instead, what we find is that they have to influence without that authority. And in order to do that, they've got to be good negotiators. They have to understand the give and take of any situation, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, where can trade-offs occur, and so forth. They're going to have to be able to persuade others through the strength of their argument and potentially the presentations that they have to make, where that art of the BRM role really begins to manifest itself, and it revolves around the idea that they are very clear, very crisp in terms of the ideas that they're bringing forward, and they're able to present them in such a way that the audience is convinced that this is the right way to go. They've got to be able to see the big picture. If they're going to be focused on working with the business to understand how strategies and the likes can be manifested through or delivered through the service and the products of the service providing organization or IT, they have to be able to see not just the individual operational elements that underpin, say, what IT does, but also what is the potential, what's the possibilities that are associated with that service provider or the IT organization, and how they will relate and tie back to the strategies of the business. They have to understand the business. They have to understand it to the extent that they know how the business operates. They think in business terms. The business themselves actually looks at the BRM as almost being one of them. And the same is true on the IT side of the house. They have to have good understanding of how IT functions, what are the key elements that are associated with delivering services and products out of the IT organization, what are the key roles, what's possible and what's not possible. And most importantly, as a communicator, they also convey and help instruct the other parties to this conversation, both the business and IT, in terms of what the other can do or what the other requires of each other. So what the business could expect from IT and what IT needs to understand about the business and how they work. They need to be able to keep that even keel in rough waters. Sometimes things aren't going to go as well. There's going to be issues, there are going to be challenges and so forth. And so they need to have that ability to deal effectively when there's a bit of turbulence, to be able to settle things down, to not get caught up in the emotional content, which means that they also need to understand what their own individual personal limitations are, what they're good at, what they're not good at, and when do they need to bring help in to bear. They need to be able to connect the dots, those things that others don't see. The business potentially might not see a trend on the horizon relative to either the competition, the technology, regulatory issues, other environmental factors that might be coming into play that could impact the business. They've got to be able to see that and to connect the dot from those challenges, those drivers, back to what are the capabilities of the IT organization, and in essence become sort of the ultimate problem solver for both organizations. And then last but not least, they have to be capable of doing what I call soft and hard analysis. With the hard analysis, kind of the easy one, right? They're going to look at the numbers, they're going to understand how things work or don't work and what have you. But then the soft side is looking for the intangibles, the influences that happen within an organization, such as relationships, whether they're strong or not, the skill and talents or the possibilities of others, and to be able to analyze those and to bring those forward as either possible leverage points or maybe challenges that have to be dealt with. This list, I mean, and again, it's a short list. For me, it's just something that I feel is important for those that are beginning to think about the BRM role. Again, just something to consider. So if that we have a skilled set of individuals, we understand what role they're going to play. Is there a level of maturity that's associated with that BRM role? And the body of knowledge that was published by the BRM Institute suggests that there's 5 very specific roles. The first of those is ad hoc. Basically, this is the time when the IT organization is really kind of struggling to keep the lights on, and there really isn't a lot of value that's being perceived by the business in terms of what IT can deliver. And as such, the BRM role really isn't well defined, well articulated, and probably doesn't even truly exist. But when we move up the scale, we go to order taker. If there isn't a BRM role, normally this would be the starting point where there's some level of understanding, very little trust, but at least some understanding of what the IT capabilities are. But IT at this point, as I said in an earlier slide, this is the order taker. We'll do whatever you say. If you bring to us the solution, we'll put it into play. But if we then start to think in terms of what are the services that might be possible, we understand what value can be delivered. We understand how to deliver projects, maybe not big stuff just yet, but understand what projects might be and how they could be useful for the business partner organization. This starts to define the service partner role. But where we really want to get to are the top 2 maturity levels. The first of those is the trusted advisor role. This role is one where the BRM, instead of focusing on projects and initiatives and the like in the server partner at the service partner maturity level, instead, what the trusted advisor role now is, this is where the BRM is working with the business to understand what specific challenges might be, what the strategies could look like. Maybe they're asked to identify where maybe there's some executional gaps that need to be addressed. Again, because they have their fingers in both camps, both the business and IT, they're there to help support the conversations that are associated with developing that strategy. But then at the highest level, and this is what we really talk about with respect to how the BRM role truly does play a strategic mission within the organization, and that's where the BRM role is functioning at the strategic partner role. This is where the BRM truly does understand the business well enough that they are helping shape the direction of the business, and they do it because they have an eye to not only what does it take for the business to be successful. They think in business terms. They think of themselves as partners to the business, but they also have an eye to what the IT or service provider organizations can also deliver. And so it's at this point that the BRM is sitting at the table to help shape the direction of the organization. And it is at the strategic partner level that the BRM role truly does manifest itself in terms of being a strong leverage point for the organization. Now, there is a toolkit that can help us get there to become that strategic partner within an organization. And that toolkit is defined across what we call the house of the BRM. Again, this is borrowed from the BRM body of knowledge from the BRM Institute. And so the BRM toolkit, in essence, has 6 competencies and 4 very specific disciplines. The competencies themselves, as you can see, we talk about what does it take to be a strategic partner and how does that work, developing a deep understanding of the business, understanding how the business works and how value is created, understanding how if we identify gaps or initiatives that need to be moved forward to support business strategies and so forth as a result, and would require additions to or investments in the service portfolio, taking an active role in portfolio management, and then also understanding the services and how those services are provided by IT, and how they serve as the connective tissue between the business and business success, and also what does it mean to make those changes and to monitor them and manage them. And then we have two other, what I would consider to be elements that are part of that soft environment, and that is the skills around communication and also recognizing business transition management or organizational change and helping shift the organization from the old way of working to the new. Those 6 very specific competencies then play out across the 4 disciplines of the organization. So demand shaping, understanding what the demand is of the business, to be able to match that up with the capabilities of the IT organization. Exploring, which is to look into the future, to examine and evaluate trends that are evolving as a result of, say, the competitive space, regulatory, technology, things of that nature, and using both the exploring and the demand shaping disciplines as a way to identify initiatives that could be initiated by the service provider organization, IT, to support the strategic needs of the business. And then we look at, once we've identified and put into play those service portfolio changes, we then look at the servicing, where we evaluate how well those services are being delivered, and make sure that the business understands clearly what's possible or not possible as respects those services. And then the last but not least is value harvesting, where we examine the value that we expected to have been delivered. Are we truly delivering that value to the business to be able to measure it, and then identify any opportunities to improve wherever possible. This is what we call the house of IT, or excuse me, the house of BRM. And for us, it's really a very important concept as we think about BRM. So I've been talking a little bit about the BRM Institute, and you might be saying, well, what is this? I've not heard of this before. Well, the BRM Institute was formed in March 2013. It's a nonprofit organization that's specifically focused on the role and the disciplines of business relationship management. In the short time that they've been in existence, they've acquired 14,000, almost 15,000 members now on a global basis, and they are a very, very active community. Strongly recommend that you look into joining the BRM Institute. I've been a member now for a number of months, and I'm just amazed at how active the BRM community is in terms of sharing thoughts, ideas, and adding to this body of knowledge that's key and critical to the role and the discipline of BRM, which leads me to just a kind of a quick summary of what it is that the BRM has done. So they've identified those, what they call the DNA of the BRM, which is the concentric circles that you see in the lower left hand of this slide. And the DNA is embodied within this body of knowledge. As a member of BRMI, you can download the body of knowledge, so you at least have the hard or soft copy, however you wish to do it. Obviously, you're going to download, you'll have the soft, but you can choose to print it if you wish. But also, what's really exciting about what goes on within the Institute and its members is that individuals are every day adding to the body of knowledge through the wiki that's supported by the Institute. So, all right, so if we've got a body of knowledge, how can and we've talked a little bit about this and the importance of becoming strategic in terms of our relationship with the business, how could we potentially learn more about that? Well, there's a course that Pink Elephant is teaching. It's called the BRM professional foundation course. And these are some of the key elements and learnings that we talk about in that course. It's a 3-day course. It's a certification that when you receive that certification, it's internationally recognized, and the certification and the course itself is taught by folks such as Pink Elephant, but it's also comes through the auspices of APMG. APMG has worked with the Institute to stand up this course and to provide the certification. And so for us, the thing that we're going to focus on is understand what the role is, how do we mature that role, how do we build relationships, how do we work with our customers in terms of understanding what the value looks like and what the value needs are of the organization, and are there ways in which that value could leak away, and then how can we address that, and then to deal with some of these competencies that we've talked about. So let me just kind of give you a taste of some of the tools that come out of the body of knowledge and I think are kind of critical to the BRM themselves to be successful. So some examples of this. So at the highest level, these are the various elements that we talk about in the course itself. And what I've done is I've organized some of the key concepts, the frameworks, models, and the like into 3 very specific areas. So one area would be what we would associate with the role, such as the 3 metaphors or those 3 roles that I talked about earlier, the connector, orchestrator, and navigator, and how all that would apply and could be used by individuals who are functioning as BRMs in an organization. And then there's sets of disciplines that are either associated very specifically with the BRM role itself, or they could be applied more broadly across the entire organization, whether that is only for the business or for IT or potentially other service provider organizations. And so this is at the end of 3 days, this is what students are exposed to in the course. And so let's look at a couple of these in a little bit more detail. So one of what I would consider to be the artful frameworks of discipline is this idea of building a strategic relationship with the business partner by IT, and that there's a set of steps that the BRM and individuals from the IT organization would go through to orchestrate and coordinate and initiate very specific conversations, interviews, and the like with key stakeholders that sit in the business. And so these 5 steps will generate themselves into a set of documents that will support the development of a relationship. It's not going to identify the specific changes that need to be made relative to the service portfolio. There's other frameworks that we talk about that would relate to service portfolio updates or service initiatives. But instead, what we're going to look for are where are the gaps that are preventing the relationship between the 2 organizations to rise to the highest level of maturity, such as being there at that strategic partner level. And as we identify what those issues are and challenges, then we together, both the business partner and IT, make plans that we can then execute to improve the way in which we work together to solve our mutual issues, challenges, and so forth. And then on an ongoing basis, we continue to cycle back through this to foster and mature that relationship. The next one, the model is, and this is really in more of the science space, although I'm going to lead from this conversation into the next one, which is sort of a bridge between the 2, is that this is a maturity model that a BRM could use to carry on a dialogue with both the business partner as well as IT leadership to understand how the way in which each of the organization is working, how does its very specific maturity impact the other. And so in this case, what we do is we look at 3 different levels. In some cases, it could be 5. The authors talk about, using the model as the basis for starting the conversation, but if the levels don't work, then you can modify the levels to fit your own individual needs. But the idea is that every organization goes from the very lowest level where you're trying to figure out how to get things to work, how to make the processes function within the organization, work within our silos, keep the lights on, get the environment stable on the IT side of the house, and then move it up the scale to where the organization is working seamlessly with very defined processes to create an enterprise framework, and where IT then starts to jump in by managing those systems and those services that support an enterprise-wide view of the business. And then at the very highest level of this maturity scale is one where IT itself becomes a differentiator for the business, and it helps support growth and innovation, and to be able to respond quickly to the competitive forces that are in play that are impinging upon the business itself. But you notice here that there's 2 different colors, right? So there's this pink color and a blue color. Well, those define where the BRM is either functioning at a tactical level, kind of this underpinning basics that need to be in play, and then also being able to function at that more strategic, whether it's the trusted advisor or the strategic partner role. And so this slide details what is needed in order to be both tactical as well as to be strategic. And notice that in the blue column, the strategic level still has to do these tactical things, has to understand how services are delivered, have to understand what the needs are around security, has to understand what are the various needs and requirements in order to understand, manage, and deliver services. The BRM has to do those before they become strategic. So those tactical levels become table stakes to move up into a strategic role. And then once we understand and can deal with those tactical levels, now we can start to have more insightful conversations, conversations that will help drive value that becomes not just a one-to-one, but we actually see synergy that comes about as a result of the services being deployed by IT back to the business. We understand how we can affect changes and what the right changes are across the portfolio, how we shape that business demand, and how we can integrate the capabilities of the IT organization so that the demand can not only be met when it's needed, but also that the IT organization has in play all of the various elements that allow for that demand as the velocity of it changes, that the IT organization is there to support it. Now, one of the ways that we can affect that is by building roadmaps. And so one of the skill sets and one of the practices and models that's talked about within the body of knowledge is this idea of building a business capability roadmap, where on the basis of understanding the business strategies, the BRM works with the business and the IT organization to develop what are changes that are needed relative to the capabilities of both the business as well as the IT organization. What has to be put into play so those strategies can play themselves out, and also because the BRM has that foot in both camps and has transparency into the business as well as IT, they look for other opportunities across the enterprise so that we can eliminate the redundancy of doing the same thing 2 and 3 and 4 times, solving the same problems and the like as we address these capabilities. And all this begins to translate itself now into a set of initiatives and so forth that will build out additional technologies and skills. And so there has to be a means by which we can clearly articulate and make decisions relative to what changes need to be made, and we can do that by using a value management process. And we talk about this actually at great length, where we identify where the possibilities are, where value can be. If we add value to the business, what would the benefits specifically be, and then work through the decisioning process, such as portfolio management and the like, using the discipline of business case and so forth, so that we can move forward the very specific initiatives that will bring high value to the organization. We eliminate the potential for addressing low value initiatives. And then once we have those initiatives in play, they've been added to the capabilities of the two organizations. They'd be adding to the service portfolio of the IT organization. We then don't walk away from the picture. Instead, what we do is we continue to monitor. Remember, value harvesting is one of the 4 disciplines of BRM. The BRM is working with the IT organization to assure that the promised value is truly being delivered, and that we're then communicating back to both the business as well as IT in terms of value captured and any issues or challenges that the BRM is seen as witnessing where potential improvements might need to be made. So that just kind of gives you a feel for some of those concepts and models that we talk about but in the course, but also recognize that the BRM, in order for the BRM to be effective, yes, the art side is important, to be able to build those relationships, to be able to have good, constructive, fruitful conversations, but also it's critical that the BRM himself or herself must also have some arrows in their quiver, tools that they can use that can help underpin and sustain those relationships. And so I think that there's probably some tips, tricks, and traps with respect to orchestrating and bringing forward the BRM role in any organization. To me, the top of the list is that it's going to require senior leadership support. I don't think that as a grassroots effort, BRMs themselves could be successful, where somebody says, I think I will be a BRM. No, I'm not sure that that's going to happen unless the leadership on both the IT side as well as the business side provide their full support. Clearly, you're going to have to find the right individuals for the job. I mean, we talked about that skill set, and that I wouldn't suggest that that is the all-encompassing, be-all, end-all skill set. Matter of fact, if you want to explore some of the additional skills, you might go out and look for the skills for an information age. We call it SFIA, S-F-I-A, and within that skills framework, they detail other skills that might be helpful and instrumental in your organization in terms of defining what that job might need. But clearly, once you've got those right individuals identified, then you need to provide them with the tools that are required, and this is where that BRM professional certification comes into play. And I can't stress enough how important it would be for your BRMs to become members of and become active in the BRM Institute, to be able to share their knowledge, their experiences, and also take advantage of that knowledge and experience that's being shared by others. There is going to be an organizational change challenge. Today, there's individuals that you have inside your organization who perform what they believe is the BRM role. They believe that they're having the conversation with the business, that they understand the needs of IT. It could be folks like enterprise architects. It could be application developers. It could be the CTO. It could be the chief information security officer. It could be a lot of folks that today do have conversations with the business, and they're going to feel that this BRM role is basically stepping on what they consider to be the importance of what they bring to work every day. And so helping others understand what this role is intended to do, what it's intended to accomplish, the importance of it, the strategic nature of it, and so forth, it will really require the development of an organizational change plan and a strategy, and a lot of this is going to have to do with communication and education, helping the BRM be successful in some of their the initial work that they're going to do. And so it will be important to, as the role moves forward, to be able to measure and report specific success. I'd suggest go find organizations, groups, functions, departments that would be willing to participate in a new BRM role. Find those groups that are willing to kind of take a risk, letting the BRMs experiment a little bit with these tools and frameworks and so forth. And then as you've identified the wins that come from those initial efforts, talk about those, use those as leverage as you begin to expand the BRM out across the enterprise. And then last but not least, I believe that service and service thinking is key and critical. You know, if the BRM has a foot in both camps, they understand the business, they understand IT, well, the way in which the connection or the value that's going to be delivered that the BRM is going to have visibility to will be through this notion of services, that we in the IT organization are providing those connected elements that are being consumed by the business that creates value for them and helping them do their job, and understanding what those services are and being able to manage back against those services and manage as services but not as specific technologies such as infrastructure and application, but understand how they come together as a cohesive product to serve the needs of the business. That is going to be important. And so as the BRM begins to understand their connection between the two organizations, where they stand in that Venn diagram, I would also offer up that the idea of services and service management also fits very tightly into that thinking. So in summary, I would tell you that I have seen the BRM role itself. It's becoming emergent across multiple industries. There's no single industry that can lay claim to the fact that they do it better than anybody else. I've seen it everything from healthcare through manufacturing to governmental entities to the science community and so forth. And so it is an emerging role. It's one that folks are still working to understand and to craft within their organization. And so it's important to recognize that also that role is not just limited to IT. The BRM role can apply to any service provider organization. I've talked a lot today about IT because I think a lot of our examples are, especially in the course, are suggested using IT as the basis for the service provider, but HR, finance, legal, all of those are service providers to the business or business partners in an organization. So the BRM concepts, roles, and the like can apply equally to those other service provider groups. Value creation and management is absolutely a critical business metric. It's one that needs to be identified so that it can be not only measured, but also reported and potentially improved as the work of the BRM begins to move forward. The idea of the role, it forms that basis for improving the business partner, collaboration, coordination, and convergence between the business partner and the service provider. That whole relationship now can become tighter basically through the auspices of the BRM role. And then last but not least, the BRMs, they should be able to foster not just that strategic conversation. We want them to do that, but they also have to understand that if they don't understand the operational complexities, that what are the needs to execute tactical plans and to meet those tactical goals and objectives, that they are basically selling themselves short in terms of what they can do to support their two very specific customers, who they serve in terms of the service provider as well as their business partner. So for me, it's really not just a question of if you would do this. It really, for organizations, I think it really comes down to a question of when you're going to stand up BRMs within your organization. So I hope that this webinar has been helpful to you. It is one that I have spent a fair amount of time on, both as a practitioner before I joined Pink Elephant, as well as working with organizations as they've either stood it up or were thinking about it or were moving it forward. So if there are any questions, if you want to type those into the chat window, I'd be happy to answer those. Any questions? Okay, well, I don't see any questions, so if you have any following this webinar, please feel free to reach out to me at my email address. You see it there, j.probst@pinkelephant.com. Also, we're active in the Twitter space, and please join us on our website, not only the offering of BRM, the BRM Professional Foundation course, but also other educational products and consulting services, as well as our conferences. So I hope this has been helpful to you. Have a good day. Thank you very much.